buggy from Mare Transportation to an art form. But wait, these are not your typical neighborhood cars. The hidden backwoods of Connecticut burst to life this weekend as many of history's famous racing machines gather. But more than just cars, this celebration attracts racing immortals and the legends of the industry that only grow and never die. However, these are not delicate museum pieces. Next, share in this happy gathering wonderful, irreplaceable cars and friendships that last forever. ESPN, the world leader in motorsports coverage, celebrating its 10th year, presents Speed World. Today on ESPN, something very unique from the family of motor racing. This is the 7th annual Vintage Fall Classic from Lime Rock Park in Connecticut. Hi, I'm Larry Nuber along with Vic Alford, and we're here to celebrate the first 60 years of the motor racing car. And for Vic, it's a very unique perspective because many cars similar to this and some of these very cars you have driven.
Yes, indeed, Larry. I've driven a number of the cars that are here today. And in fact, later on in the program, viewers are going to have a very special treat with a lap around Lime Rock in one of the Porsche 908s that I drove 20 years ago.
Vic, a record number of entries again here this week, over 300, and everything from Ferraris whose value simply cannot be estimated easily into the millions to short track oval racers and to little Mini Coopers that are still on the market for about $20,000. This sport just continues to explode. What's the attraction?
I think the attraction is the history and the heritage. You know, American history as a nation is only about 200 years old, and the history of the automobile accounts for more than 1/3 of that.
Well, Vic, this is also a weekend celebration of an anniversary, the 30th of the Formula Libre race. Now, that was one of the most unique races in the annals of road racing. It was the original run what you brung race for road racers. And, of course, there were Aston Martins here and Maseratis, as well as USAC midgets. It was actually a USAC-sanctioned race.
I think the story there is that in modern times, we're so money-orientated that after a race, we tend to forget about it, think just about the next one. Whereas with the Formula Libre event 30 years ago, it was such a unique once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-century race that anybody connected with it just had an unforgettable experience.
The drivers seem to remember not only every lap, but every corner. That race, by the way, was won by the reigning Indianapolis 500-mile race champion of that year. So, vintage racing comes to ESPN. And this spectacle is brought to you by BMW, the ultimate driving machine. To arrange a thorough test drive, simply phone your nearest BMW dealer. And by Quaker State Motor Oil. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will. And by new Michelob Dry. One taste and you'll drink it dry. You'll see cars spanning the early teens to the 70s today on ESPN.
There are those who fervently believe that true perfection is found in the details. At the Bavarian Motor Works, we gave that belief a name. We call it the BMW 735i. Beautiful, to be sure. Yet perhaps the most beautiful thing about it is its spirit.
Lime Rock Park is a very active racetrack with several SCCA and IMSA weekends annually. Well, Vic Alford, a past world sports car and Formula One driver, will take us around this very special course, a link this weekend between the past and the present.
We come across the start-finish line at about 160 miles an hour in 5th gear. Heavy braking down to 3rd gear for Big Bend. Accelerating through Big Bend very gently up towards the S's, quickly up to 4th gear and 100 miles an hour. Back down to 3rd gear. The swooping left-hander, you have to keep the car tucked very closely into the left to get it positioned for the right-hand corner onto No Name Straight. Accelerating through No Name Straight up into 4th gear and about 130 miles an hour. Down to 3rd gear and the braking for the climbing turn, and the car goes light over the crest in the climbing turn into 4th gear on the back straight, 130 miles an hour. through the West Bend, still about 130 miles an hour underneath the very low bridge, quickly up into fifth gear, 130, 140 miles an hour through the diving turn and back onto the pit straight, accelerating back up to 150, 160 miles an hour again across the start-finish line.
Thanks, Vic. We'll talk about memories. Over 300 cars have entered here this weekend in 11 classes. There are several criteria the judges use, and there's also a special cup awarded, but not necessarily to the winner of each event. Now, this is the vintage exhibition for pre-war and selected post-war sports cars. There are also some Formula cars in here, and if you look real closely, you might see at least one former Indianapolis car from the 30s. Now, displacements range anywhere from 740 on the low end to the huge Bentleys with a displacement of 6,500 cc's. And there is one of those Bentleys, Vic, looks almost like some animal getting ready to swallow up the smaller displacement cars.
Well, yes, indeed. In fact, this is supposed to be an exhibition, not a race, but it's very difficult to tell that from watching the behavior of some of the cars and drivers.
That number 275 right there is a 1939 BMW Cabriolet driven by Joel Goldstein of New York City. And look at this, a 1922 Ford Championship car. In other words, one of the cars that ran on the dirt miles in America in the first quarter of this century.
Which in turn looks as though it will be swallowed up itself by the great Zinn Buick.
Meanwhile, up front, the Bugatti 35B, that car was constructed in 1928, continues to lead. It's being driven by Donald Coleman, and you can see that big Bentley is trying to cut into that advantage. Coming down the front stretch, moving to the inside in the red car, that's number 90. That is a 1934 Alfa Romeo driven by Gary Schoenwald, and he puts a move on the leaders and takes over the number 1 position going into Big Bend.
And is now way out on front on his own with the little Bugatti tucking in very easily behind him through the corners.
Many of these cars simply have price tags on them that cannot really be developed in a definitive way. You cannot assess the value of many of these cars.
Well, to such a point, I think if I owned one, I would lock it up and throw the key away for a few years rather than drive it on a racetrack.
Now, in the center of the screen, that metallic green car is a Studebaker. Now, this was built in 1931, built at the Studebaker Proving Grounds in South Bend, Indiana. It was a highly secretive project, and when it debuted at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, there were only 4 or 5 Studebaker officials who knew that it was coming.
And in fact, this car was the initial prototype of those first Indianapolis cars. A sister car to this now is in the Indianapolis Museum.
And Vic, it still has the original drivetrain and 336 cubic inch engine. After all these years, including 7 years on the highway, it still runs.
It not only still runs, but it makes one wonder just what it must have been like driving such a monster.
Well, receiving the checkered flag first in this exhibition is Gary Schoenwald of New York, New York, the winner, so to speak, of the competition on the track. Here is the top 3. Dale Powers was second in his Bentley, and Nicholas Jones in a 1929 Bentley was third. Another theme of this weekend is a tribute to the great cars of Great Britain. One of England's most prolific vintage car collectors is Reg Parker. David Hobbs recently visited him.
Just a few miles south of Donington Park, and we're in a typical British Midlands industrial town. And this very ordinary suburban street is the most unlikely setting for one of the finest private vintage car collections to be found anywhere. One of the more modern, but certainly no less desirable cars here is this red 1960 XK150S drophead coupe. With its 3.8-litre double overhead camshaft, triple carburetted engine, this car was capable of 150 mph when it was introduced. This 1924 3-litre Bentley, like all of this collection, has been beautifully and painstakingly restored. And not just on the outside either. Just look at this beautiful engine, polished from cam cover to sump drain plug. 3-litre, 4-cylinder, about 85 horsepower. Twin SU carburetors and twin ignition, plus 4 extra spark plugs just in case. This car is a 1924 3098 Wenson boat-tailed tourer. A Mr. Hancock's, a man of nautical leaning, designed this body and named it after his boat, called Wensum. In the rain, it kept driver and passengers in the marine environment, as there is no provision for a hood. This car was also raced at Brooklands in the 1920s. Beautiful but massive controls are evident, with the large external handbrake and gear lever. The collection belongs to Reg Parker, and we're sitting in his immaculately restored 1924 3-litre Bentley. Did you ever think that the collection would appreciate the way that it probably has?
No, I didn't. No, definitely not.
What's your favourite car here?
Well, undoubtedly the 8-litre. It's got so much torque and power. It's such a wonderful, long-legged car. It's fantastic.
Well, there's a father and son who've acquired a very fine collection of automobiles, and they really did it because they loved cars. That was their first and prime consideration.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hobbs. And coming up a little later, the highlight of this weekend, the 30th anniversary of Lime Rock's Formula Libre race. Real race cars, of course, either old or new, are meant for the track, so let's return to that now. This category is called Historic Exhibition for sports cars dated 1949 to 72. These are more powerful cars than the vintage classification you saw in the last exhibition. A lot of C production cars of SCCA in this. There may be a few single-seaters in this division also. Leading the event is a Ford GT40, of course, the characteristic dark blue and orange colors. Interesting machines, Vic.
Yes, very interesting. In fact, these are the cars that Ford went to Le Mans with to wrest World Championship sports car racing away from the Europeans back in the mid-60s.
You'll also notice some very distinguishable characteristic black and gold of Shelbys. There's yet another Shelby 350 GT that is competing in this classification.
And these Shelby Mustangs were also benefiting from the technology Ford was developing in their quest for leadership in World Championship racing.
Another car that falls into the classification in this group is a number 19 Denzel Roadster. That is Bill Hoff from Monroe, Louisiana. Meanwhile, up front, Miles Collier in his Ford GT40, the man who owns one of the most famous vintage car museums in the world, continues to lead very easily. You see the Shelbys are in hot pursuit. Collier is leading comfortably. This is the first time out in over a decade for this car. This car was originally designed to be driven on the street, but it was pressed into service and very successfully. Then a few laps later in this exhibition, the 250 Ferrari, the long wheelbase machine of Sherman Wolf, had a problem.
And this car spinning off there was actually built as a street car, but ended up winning races in 1959, 1960 against the American Corvettes, even though it was running with a much smaller engine.
Kendall Merritt is driving a Ferrari 246S in this. We ask him, what's it like to drive one of these priceless cars on the track?
I definitely have butterflies before I go out on the track, but as soon as I start the engine up and start to let her warm up, they kind of go away, and you start thinking about the first corner and, you know, first gear and whatnot. And, I mostly watch the people around me. Being the value of the car and whatnot, I'd sure hate to cut somebody off. And it's just fun to kind of recreate what it must have been like to race a car back in the 50s and 60s. I drive the car for maybe 15, 20 minutes at the session, and I'm wringing wet with sweat. I can't imagine what those guys were like back in those days, running 6 hours at a time, 4 or 6 hours.
Well, I remember driving even for 9 hours through the night at Le Mans in pouring rain. And here we have a very, very tricky move by the Mercedes on the inside. In fact, I believe in a no-passing zone, as this is not a race, but a demonstration.
I think you're right. There was a no-passing zone. Alex Dearborn has moved underneath. Meanwhile, Miles Collier is the first one taking the checker, crossing the stripe at the end of this particular exhibition. So, like in the late 1960s, when the Fords won Le Mans 4 years in a row, they reign again. Doug Richmond is second, and in a similar Shelby GT350, Richard Kopech finishes third. Coming up next, cars designed for the track, not the road.
Introducing the new BMW 5 Series sedan. The spirit of a car company, sculpted into 3,400 pounds of steel, glass, and leather.
Some of the activities are in the skies this weekend. This is a Korean War Navy trainer Lockheed T-28 belonging to Peter Labanos, himself active in vintage cars. And this, on the track, is the sports racing car division. These cars are designed to race. We're basically looking at 3 classes here, of course, based on cubic inch displacement.
And here, in fact, the second place car is number 7, the Aston Martin DB4 of Murray Smith, which may look out of place, but in fact was a pure racing-bred machine.
Among the Aston Martins, Ferraris, and the Coopers, a wide variety of cars, including that Lola MK1, that number 63. There is Bob Akin. He's looking very fancy in his Cooper Monaco.
And indeed, there's a very good race developing behind Bob now, with the Aston Martin of Murray Smith, with the Lotus 11 of Brian McEachern, and especially the Ferrari Testarossa of Peter Sachs, number 37.
There you see the Ferrari with the twin nostrils front end, which still can be seen to this day on the American-produced Pontiac line of cars. Akin continues to lead. As you can see, the people behind him scrambling around, everyone looking for that runner-up position behind Akin.
Was scrambling around, but indeed you'll see that once the Aston gets its head as it comes onto the straight, it actually can pull away from all the smaller machinery. They, in their turn, then close up very comfortably on braking and cornering through the S's as we see here.
Kicking up all the dust was that silver Lotus 11 driven by Brian McEachern. He started second, and it looks like he's one of the faster cars in the track, but having trouble keeping on line.
Well, having trouble keeping on line, but he's managed to find a way around the Aston Martin now. And number 37, Peter Sachs's Ferrari, is also looking for a way around. There
is the Bow car, the very distinguishable design of the 1959 XP5 driven by Bill Butler. And in that red car is the 58 Devon SS driven by Rich Taylor of Sharon, Connecticut. He's the man who put together the Formula Libre race you'll see a little later in this broadcast.
And indeed, Rich Taylor is a local guy from Sharon, just down the road, so we can expect a good showing from him at his home track.
Brian McEachern is gaining some ground on the racing surface. He stretches out a little bit. As you can see, the cars running second, third, fourth, and fifth. As Akin continues to just decimate. And we have a spin in this one. That is Brian McEachern.
And Brian spins his second place away, because now swooping past from the inside go Murray Smith and the Aston Martin, followed by the Ferrari.
So McEachern, who was as high as second, slips to fifth in his Lotus 11, but stays out there.
But now we have Murray Smith with the Aston Martin being pressed harder and harder by Peter Sachs in the 37 Ferrari.
Let's look at that McEachern incident once again. You can see he was on the outside of the track first, lost control, and then spun out on the inside.
Yes, he almost caught it on the first part of the spin. In fact, it wasn't a spin to start with. It was as he came back onto the track that he lost control.
Well, many of these cars have a long history behind them, and Brian McEachern is stretching the history of his Lotus 11 in this one, adding years to its historical repertoire. Murray Smith once again holding back a raft of cars, all trying to move around him, as that race car is using up a lot of the track.
And indeed, the Aston Martin of Murray Smith, I'm sure, is a lot wider than its design has ever intended. In fact, he is holding up the traffic now, so that McEachern has been able to come back right on the bumper of the Ferrari.
And that V12 Ferrari won Le Mans in 1961. It's a 61 Ferrari 250 with Peter Sachs of nearby Stamford, Connecticut behind the wheel. Now, a little later, watch for Dick Scott in his Lola Mark I. He has a problem entering Big Bend in the very first corner, kicking up a lot of dust, and the leader, Bob Akin, is coming around. Now, will he have any problem traversing what is a new obstacle in this lap? Akin, like the veteran and professional race driver that he is, just darts through all of the debris and continues on his way. Now, these Lola Mark I's were designed to beat the Lotus 11s. They actually became the ultimate small displacement front engine sports cars of their time. Now, here's what happened to him, Vic.
Well, as Dick Scott comes down into the braking zone for Big Bend, he just simply leaves it far too late, locks up all the wheels and slides straight into Rich Taylor's Devon, which helps him, in fact, to slow down and get at least partly out of the way.
Meanwhile, the journey of Brian McEachern continues, as watch for him in the silver car. He'll go to the outside of the red Ferrari of Peter Sachs and makes a great pass where you're not supposed to be able to get around the outside.
In fact, you're not supposed to be able to get around the outside there, but the Lotus 11 now looks as though it's trying to swallow the Aston Martin. Meanwhile, back in the front is leader Bob Akin's Cooper Monaco.
You know, every one of these vintage weekends has a lot of personality to it. There are several events week-long, but in each case, the cars are the stars. So we are presenting to you a lot of racing because we know that's what everyone wants to see. These vintage cars in action doing their thing, if you will. Allow me to use a contemporary term.
Well, in action doing their thing, and in fact, although Lime Rock Park is only 1.5 miles around, it's very reminiscent of the sort of racing these cars were doing 20, 30 years ago at the Nürburgring.
Well, Akin is going to win this one easily, but Murray Smith is holding back Brian McEachern. McEachern had just an exciting race, and Murray Smith doing an excellent job keeping back the rest of the field.
Well, not only doing an excellent job keeping back the rest of the field, but creating a superb race, because without Murray Smith, I'm sure the next 5 cars would be strung out all over the track.
So Murray Smith very ecstatic over his performance in this race. And Bob Akin is the winner in Group E. So Akin, who calls this track his home racetrack, wins. And as we look at the results of the top 3, let's talk about another one of those events, the Concours d'Elegance. So this is an event that takes place on the 3rd day, and most of these cars were never intended to race. Awards are given for the best interior, the best exterior, and several other special awards, all a part of this weekend. And it really exhibits the spirit of vintage car meets, doesn't it, Vic?
Well, very much the spirit, and it also shows the feeling that people have about these cars. You know, the Concours d'Elegance is not just polishing up a car. These people look after them, appreciate them the way other collectors appreciate paintings or sculpture or other fine art.
The cars are rolled out onto the front straightaway, and many people that otherwise would not have an opportunity to even get within a neighborhood of these machines can walk up and not touch them, but breathe them.
Well, breathe them, feel them, almost dream of the luxury that one appreciated in these cars of the past, especially the really old cars of the past.
Mike Amalfitano, standing amidst his Porsches, went home with Best in Show with his 910. We'll be back.
By 6 o'clock Sunday evening, the contest was over. Europe's leading luxury car makers had asked America's luxury car owners a very simple question. Which car did they prefer driving? And in 8 important categories, they received a very simple answer. The new BMW 535i. Some would say it was no contest at all.
Amongst his many ceremonial responsibilities this weekend, Rodger Ward was also a tour guide, taking around a BMW executive, David Riley. Now, we're going to move into a highlight section of 3 classes. First, a couple of vintage production-based classes, and then a Formula car class. This is vintage production-based cars to 1953 of under 1,300 cubic centimeters and to 1959 under 2,000. Now, these cars are dated 1947 to 1959 and include Lancias, Lotus Elites, Alpines, Turners, MGs, and a Maserati 3500 GT among the midst.
And indeed, we've got a lot of cars here that really have vanished completely from the world of the automobile these days. Turner 950 from Great Britain, Abarth DBs from Italy, Morgans, which are in fact still around.
This may have been the most competitive race of the weekend. You'll see a lot of changes up front as we zero in on the 1959 Turner 950 of Anthony Jansen from Connecticut. And slipping off course is a 51 MGTD of Jack Parker, but he keeps going straight and gets back into the competition.
And we have Sid Herman leading the competition at the moment with the beautiful Alfa Giulietta from Italy, followed very, very closely now by Tom Kent in the Turner.
Now, the contest for first position is a long ways from over, so keep your eyes peeled on this one because there will be several changes like this one.
And as they come into the climbing turn, Tom Kent takes his turn to pass on the inside. Slower traffic probably helps him a little there. Back onto the straight. And Sid Herman tries to return the compliment. In fact, he does do so. He gets inside in Big Bend once again overtaking traffic, is playing a role in the battle.
But later in the race for the third, and it will be the final time, Kent moves to the inside, going into Big Bend and takes the lead. But it's still not over. Lap traffic will play a role one more time, almost.
Yes, and this time the man in the hot seat is Buddy Cooperberg in an Allard. Sid Herman Goes to take him on the inside, finds Cooperberg's Allard in the way, and is forced to come back out, follow Tom Kent onto the straight, leading to this, the closest finish of the weekend.
As they streak to the line, Kent noses out Herman by just a headlight, and Klaus Steinbruck holds on for third in his 1959 A-Bar. Now, Group B is vintage production-based cars, years 50 to 62, under 1,600 cubic centimeters, one class, and another class is under 3,000. In here, you'll see Aston Minis, Morris Minis, Alphas, Triumphs, Morgans, MGs. Mini Madness, I guess, is the right way to approach this one.
Mini Madness indeed. Many of these, when we have a car off on the outside, it's number 61, Ray Dobson Spitfire. In fact, he's off because he's lost a wheel.
Yeah, there was not an incident. He didn't bump any other car. A wheel just simply came off as he entered the first corner at the green flag. Dobson is struggling to get out, and he's leaving the little Spitfire. As meanwhile, up front, one of the flying shoeboxes is running away.
Well, one of the flying shoeboxes, 05, driven by Hal Patrick, flying away perhaps. But Patsy Bowling, substituting for John Gorsline in number 3, was also using all the road trying to stay with him.
Oh, and a big moment for Hank Herman, the driver from Hamburg, New York, as he takes his 61 Alfa Romeo off course on the outside, brings it back to the inside, and somehow recovers.
Well, he does more than just recover, Larry. He actually keeps the car very smoothly down the outside edge of the track, makes no sudden movements. He did everything absolutely right, and by the time he got back into Big Bend, was well in contention again.
You know, when these cars were first manufactured, I don't think anybody really envisioned them as race cars, but through the years, they provided a lot of thrills, haven't they?
Well, they have provided a lot of thrills. The little cars like the Minis, the Juliettas, the tiny Austin Healey's and Turners. I'm sure that racing was always at the back of their designer minds.
This silver car is a 1960 Porsche Super 90 Coupe, driven by Arthur Peck. He had a big move at the start and jumped from 12th position to 7th, but he's held his own since then.
Well, he moved up, as you say, on the start line. In fact, I would suggest perhaps before the start line.
Perhaps.
He moved up from 12th position to 6th. There we have...
Hal Patrick wins this one. Patsy is second, and Mike Rosen finishes third, all in minis. Next up is Group C. Now, Group C is for all Formula cars. You'll see both front and rear engine cars, and this was a race that belonged from beginning to end to Connecticut's Joel Finn. Joel takes his 63 Lotus 27, a Formula Junior car. He holds off a fellow competitor starting on the outside of that front row and simply drives away from the rest of the field. Now, Toronto, Ontario's Oliver Klubine has a great race in his 62 Lotus 22. He is in the blue number 6. He started in second position, and he'll finish there. And Jerry Marisi also has a pretty stout event in his Lotus 22, as he will come home third. But, as we mentioned, this was a race that belonged to Joel Finn. But we're not over yet. We'll be back with a lot more action after these words. Stand by for some firepower. You're about to see the historic production-based Group F. Now, there are 4 classes with engines, most of them around 4,000 cubic centimeters, but at least one Corvette that was eligible to run in the FIA GT class had a 7.5-liter engine, and we're already under green. This is like the meeting of 2 continents. There are Mustangs, Shelbys, and Vettes versus Europe's Lotus, Jags, Porsches, and Alphas.
Yes, indeed, and here we see the field making its way through the left-hander of the S's, already stringing itself out.
Vic, one of the most unique cars in this weekend you'll see in this race, the open-wheeled red Cheetah. See it there? It's a home-based car. It's basically a Formula Libre car, but it was exciting back when it was active in racing, and it has an exciting day again here at Lime Rock this year.
And indeed, this Cheetah is a totally original, unrestored car, which is going to add a great deal of spice to the day here at Lime Rockton.
And Vic, driven by David Pacwa, the Cheetah is powered by a Cadillac and is made from the remains of a 51 Ford convertible. So as the Lotus, the Shelbys, and the Porsches go by, and in the number 661 is the Jaguar XKE of Don Moore. Up front, Andy Strasser continues to set the pace.
And indeed, Andy Strasser is setting the pace with the XKE Jaguar out in front, holding off Martin Hanshey and the Ford Mustang. Andy
Hanshey in that Ford Boss 302 started up front, and he's been able to hold on, and now Strasser slips off the course, and she just does not quite have enough room to get by, but he really has the pressure turned on. Now, for Strasser, he has to drive almost as much in his mirror as he does forward.
Yes, indeed. That was almost a very expensive mistake there. He had two wheels off in the dirt. Hanschi was able to get almost alongside, but couldn't quite make it stick.
Well, this is Miles Collier in the 70 Porsche, and we ask him, can it continue this dramatic escalation of the cost of vintage cars?
Well, I think there's two parts to that question. One is, can the values continue to escalate? And I think that for the really, truly great cars, that from now, at least in the short term, the prices are going to stay level. There just isn't that many people out there that can afford to experience an increase in value. As far as the growth of this from a grassroots level and more people coming to events like this, yes, I think there's enormous room for growth, and I think we'll see more.
Well, needless to say, memories are a big part of every one of these weekends, and we're going to show you a 1968 Porsche 911R as we look at Strasser, who continues to lead in the 67 Jag. The Porsche is being driven today by Bruce Jennings from Baltimore, this Trans Am vet. But the guy sitting next to me has experience in this Porsche we're looking at right now, the white number 18.
The white number 18, a 911R, driven today by Bruce Jennings. The very first time it had an outing in any form of competition, I drove it in France in 1967.
Now, a man who had a lifetime of experiences almost in this race was Frank Dominiani. Now, watch what happens to his red number 69 Corvette. He's off course coming off the final corner. He is back and forth. He's in front of several other competitors, and despite what looks bad in this cloud of dust, he actually escapes this, and by now he's already back on course.
Well, he did an excellent job, actually. He spun it once, I think, trying to get going. He spun it the second time in his own dust. Here come the leaders again with the Jaguar just holding off the Mustang as they go through Big Bend.
And Vic, that's going to play a role. He is right in front of the leaders, Dominiani is. Now, watch what happens a few laps later. There's Hanschi still trying to put the pressure on Strasser, and the Cheetah, Pacwa, has moved up. He'll never get by those two leading cars. Now, there's Dominiani. Now, watch what happens here in just a few seconds.
And in fact, the two leaders are closing up very close on Dominiani, which probably pressured him into his own little spin once again. At this particular time, Hanschi was able to get just a shade more room, I guess, and get by on the outside of the Jaguar.
That was a very, very close call. Now, it resulted in a lead change, but watch the job the two leaders do in missing him.
Yes, indeed. Strasser has to slow up just a shade more than Hanschi, and Hanschi is able to squeeze by between the Jaguar and the guardrail.
Now, what happens as a race driver? You had the lead stolen from you because of another incident. You really want it back, don't you?
Well, you want it back, but this time Hanschi in the Mustang in front is trying too hard to keep it. And in doing so, overcooks his own braking, giving Strasser the opportunity to come down very cleanly and smoothly and take the lead away on the inside of Big Bend.
And Pacwa had his chance there, but he decided to not go after it, as Hanschi just does get back in front of him. Now, let's look at this again, Vic, and analyze for us what happened among the two leaders.
Well, indeed, Hanschi has got the lead, trying just simply too hard to hold it. He leaves his braking far too late. Strasser indeed leaves his braking a bit too late as well, but he has the inside line, and all that Hanschi can do is just try and keep the car in one piece, pointing more or less in the right direction now, as he's having a few lefts and rights, as you can see around the dirt of the outside.
Well, Hanschi, the Trans Am veteran, took a couple of laps, but he was able to come back up and catch Strasser. And at the very end of the race, he almost got by. We had a spin that delayed the inevitable outcome, Douglas Hatch and his Corvette. Meanwhile, Hanschi is once again threatening Strasser. Now the question becomes, can he get him there? You see him trailing him. Strasser is weaving back and forth coming down the front stretch, but there's just not quite enough time, as Hanschi has to settle for second place. But he had a most adventuresome race. There is the rundown. Strasser and his Jag, Hanschi in the Mustang, and Pacwa in the 1953 Cheetah. You're looking at original 8mm film of 30 years ago, the Formula Libre race in 1959. We'll relive that in a couple of segments, and look what it cost to get in. Just $3 a head. You're looking at the 1959 and 62 winner of the Indianapolis 500 getting ready to once again do battle. Meanwhile, Group D production-based cars dated from 1955 to 1962 are out on course, 2.5-liter cars. This was really the backbone of SCCA racing in the 50s, the production racing cars of the XK 120 and 140 Jags, Lotuses, Allards, Alphas, and Mercedes.
And Bill Cullen already pushing hard in second place in the very pretty white Triumph TR4.
There you see Collin is off course in this race, and he was running in second position, as Vic mentioned, and this really cost him a lot of valuable track time. He does what he can to get his 1962 Triumph TR4 turned around, but the Mystic, Connecticut driver is out of it as far as really competing for the top spot in this production or make that Group D race.
Well, the problem for him, Larry, was that having got it turned around pointing in the right direction, the track is so narrow at that point, he just wasn't able to get back on the racing surface until everybody had gone by.
And Vic, as the race progressed, the first three cars streaked away. That is the leading Turner of Randy Lenz. Running in second is Nick Jones in his 1951 Jaguar XK 120. And in third was Don Natras in his 51 Jag.
Yes, Larry, and perhaps the most remarkable performance of all was Rich Taylor here in this brightly numbered number 71.
And that is a Kellison. He finished fifth, coming from last. Lenz, Jones, and Natras were the first three finishers in the Group D. Now, in Group G, sports racing cars from 1960 to 1972. There are a lot of Formula cars in this, Can-Am cars, Formula 1, Formula 2, and these were purpose-built for racing. And many of the cars in this division are running on slicks. The number 10 wing machine is a 1970 Lotus 70 driven by Barry Prihodka. He is from Connecticut, and he'll have a great race today. Watch for him. The win is not easy, but he turns in a terrific performance.
And now we see a little mistake by Murray Smith. He actually swerved right, got the wheels into the dust, and the car spun, snapped around hard into the guardrail. Murray luckily is okay. The accident might have happened, in fact, because he's been suffering since Friday afternoon with a burned tender region. Having
sort of an unmentionable, right?
Sort of unmentionable, having sat in gasoline for the whole race on Friday.
Now, that was a move by Ted Wenz in his 1972 McRae GM1, moving to the inside of Prihodka. As we told you, it wasn't easy. Now, this was the best race. The number 217 Matich is a Can-Am car. It's a 1970 machine driven by James Freeman. And Al Wayne as McKee has just been passed. Now back up front, there is first, second, and third. The third running car is a yellow Chevron B16, number 34. Meanwhile, Jerry Layer spins off as the battles continue for first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And here is a portrait of the old and familiar form of Sterling Moss, one that everyone who knows racing is certainly remember. Back up front, Paul Reisman in the Chevron B16 is now challenging for second. He gets it, but it's only temporary. Seconds later, he crashes against the outside guardrail uninjured. This shifts the attention back to the battle between Freeman and Way for third place. Freeman in the Matich and Way in the McKee are side by side, and once again, lap traffic interrupts as the Matich, driven by Freeman, has to take a back seat going into Big Bend. Prihodka, in his 70 Lotus, takes the checker flag. He wins easily, but now all the attention focuses to that stirring duel for third place. Now, out of the final downhill corner, that is Way in the McKee, leading Freeman in the Matich. Matich goes to the inside. He lifts his arm in triumph and just barely noses out Way in the McKee. He comes home in third. Freeman does. Wentz, of course, was second to Barry Prihodka. Now, we're only moments away from the 30th anniversary of the Lime Rock Formula Libre race. But before that, a visit with two of the prominent players from them who remain significant today, Rodger Ward and John Fitch. Ward didn't prefer to drive what turned out to be the winning car. Here is that story.
Well, actually, this is a race that I really wanted to drive because I was trying to get into road racing. It was a new challenge for me. And this particular race, Formula Libre race, seemed like a good place to start.
He was hoping for the car that got assigned to me. He was fascinated with road racing. The whole thing appealed to him, the color and the variety of cars and the circuits are interesting. Rodger's, of course, a superb driver, and it's a challenge to him. It was new, and he wanted to do it very much.
I called them all. They were very gracious, but they also didn't have a car for me. Finally, I did meet one guy who indicated perhaps he would provide me with a car. Unfortunately, between the time that I spoke to him and I got to see him and the car, he hired John Fitch.
And it was the old turn down, and he got this from Charlie Chrysler, actually. It was quite a big car dealer at the time. Said this fella, John Fitch, is going to get the car.
I don't blame the guy for doing it, but certainly it made me furious, and I did make an idle threat that no matter what I drove, I was going to be sure I beat that car.
Rodger said he made a vow that when he got to Lime Rock, he was going to beat that bastard, meaning me, you know.
Well, as it turned out, Chris Economaki called me and mentioned that there was a great midget available. And I'm thinking, Rodger, you don't want to go up there and embarrass yourself with a midget. But the promoter upped the ante a little bit, and the guy that owned the midget was a super nice guy, and I began to realize that perhaps a midget on this tight little road course might be worthwhile. And obviously it turned out very, very well.
On the first lap of the final long heat, I got around about an uphill turn and the engine went sour. I'd lost a cylinder.
So for me, it was very satisfying, and the fact that many people who had these various great cars would not let me drive it also added to this satisfaction.
Even after 30 years, the memories of these great racing drivers flawless. Coming up, Formula Libre lives again. Formula Libre. Libre in French means free or open competition. It's like an original super modified race in the States back in the 60s. Anything goes. That's Rodger Ward, who starts on the pole, and Sterling Moss in his Maserati is on the outside pole.
And Sterling Moss with the 250F Maserati already making progress around the outside. Rodger Ward's diminutive little off-the-engined single-seater pulling out a comfortable lead.
This is a Curtis Craft car, Vic, and they were very popular in the 50s and 60s. Frank Curtis out of California manufactured these cars, and they were very successful in the quarter-mile and half-mile dirt tracks. And Rodger Ward shocked the entire racing world when he won this race 30 years ago.
Well, I think he's doing the same thing today, because it, to me, is almost inconceivable that a tiny car with only one gear.
Well, in point of fact, it probably is inconceivable, as this is an exhibition in the truest sense of the word. And there are a lot of restrictions placed on this. Many of these cars, there's the Sadler, which, by the way, when it completed lap 1, went farther in 1989 than what it did in 1959. Many of these cars simply cannot be replaced. But it is really a fascinating sight to see these sports cars against the open-wheel Curtis midgets of America.
Indeed it is, Larry. But I've also driven in the past in some of these exhibitions, as we're calling it. Believe me, when you put a racing driver in a racing car, he always wants to get somewhere up near the front, exhibition or not.
That Formula One car in third is a 59 Cooper driven by Bruce McGinnis. And of course, in 2 years from this 1959 model, one of these, related cars would break that front engine, rear engine barrier at Indianapolis. And McGinnis is right up in the front. It was expected that he would do well. That is probably the most powerful car in this race today, in this exhibition.
Yes, indeed. And it was, as you said, it was the forerunner of what is the modern racing car.
There is John Fitch in his Cooper Monaco. He drove this very car in the race, the Formula Libre, back in 1959. Now, he said he was nervous before he went out, but I am told that as he left the pits and went out on the racetrack, he frightened everybody else watching him.
Well, I'm sure he did. He drove straight out of the pit lane, immediately crossed the yellow line, immediately set himself up in the correct racing line to go into the corner, all that within 50 yards of being on the racetrack.
Rodger Ward moving to racetrack left, racetrack right, that is your left, going into Big Bend. He's using a handbrake, and every once in a while you see him reach for something on the side of that open cockpit. Once again, there is the man who lives in the neighborhood, John Fitch. Not only does he live in the neighborhood, Vic, but he designed Lime Rock.
Yes, indeed. And Now we have McGuinness actually leading the parade. Rodger Ward still second in the off the engine Curtis, and we have John Fitch now and Sterling Moss following in fourth place. Now, Dick Thompson coming into view there with this unbelievable Chevrolet Stingray.
Yeah, it really is. This is a car that was actually on the racetrack about 3 seasons before it was ticketed for any year by the factory, and it was a car that basically was built upside down. All the aerodynamics were opposite, and it really was a handful to drive, but Thompson did an excellent job.
Thompson, yes, has always done an excellent job with it, but you can actually see what a handful it was, indeed still is. At a comparatively modest speed, it actually wants to take off when it comes over the crest of a hill.
Now, this number 2 car, driven today by Johnny Kay, was driven to 106 wins in 2 years by Bill Schindler, one of the most legendary Curtis Craft race cars in the history of America. Once again, there's Thompson in that original prototype Stingray.
And now we have John Fitch moving around his friend Rodger Ward. We know that this is a very much a personal thing between these two as John Fitch drives around Big Bend and off into second place.
Friend in quotes, off the racetrack, on the racetrack, they are still very much competitors.
Yes, indeed. Race drivers, however friendly they are off the track, are always competitive when they're side by side on the track.
And there is that open wheel Sadler driven by Jack Boxham. He started last. He's having a great race. Here comes another one of the Curtis Craft midgets going by. And there is Dr. Dick Thompson in that unusual prototype Corvette Stingray. As we look at John Fitch, we also want to make note of Rich Taylor, who pulled this all together. Most people thought it simply could not be done, but he has done a very terrific job. And Jim Shane of Lime Rock has also been a big help to ESPN in the production of this race. John Fitch goes downhill, and just in front of him is a most unusual car. This is a Testadoro Zagato. It's driven by George Waltman. It's a car that was originally built in 1939, then rebuilt after the war in 46, and George has owned it for many years and been active in Vinny's car racing with it.
And it's smoking and obviously feeling its age at the moment as the Sadler comes down, coming through the field very smartly indeed, moving up now to get on John Fitch's rear bumper.
And that Sadler has no transmission, just an in and out box. There is John Fitch. He's had a very steady race today. Now, a little later, we see that Rodger Ward is having problems. The hand goes up, signaling to the drivers behind him that Rodger Ward is about ready to pull off course in this 1989 version of the Formula Libre race. Here comes Dr. Dick Thompson one more time in that Stingray. Ward is coming downhill. You can see him side by side with a portrait of the 30 years of Formula Libre. The 2 cars that went out for the championship 30 years ago are together again. We'll be back with perhaps word from Ward and the finish. Those eyes.
Well, you can bet there is disappointment there. The engine began to get rough, and you know, those engines are irreplaceable. So I just could not in all good conscience stay out there and destroy the engine. But the car was running pretty well, and I was having a lot of fun bouncing around, but it was fun, and obviously I would love to have been there at the finish.
Denise McCluggage and her Porsche, you saw her also pulling off course. Meanwhile, the leader continues to be Bruce McGuinness, the instructor from right here at Lime Rock Park.
And Bruce has already gone out of sight, out of picture. He has a very comfortable lead. Boxstrom and Fitch, as you can see, still very close together. Boxstrom in front now. But Fitch moving in closer and closer as they come towards West Bend, taking advantage of a little bit of traffic on the outside. But of course, this isn't a race, officially.
Moving underneath the Ferrari as they come to the downhill section of the course. We had over 300 cars, remember, that entered here this weekend as Fitch gets a little bit of open track and a run at the Sadler. He goes to the inside, and John Fitch, he is not ready to move over and take third place lying down as John Fitch moves into the runner-up position. Vic, we were talking about as we look at one of the Ferraris, how much of a spectacle vintage racing has become. Lots of spectators here this weekend also.
Yes, I think, Larry, because we have more than just racing. You don't have to be an ardent racing fan to appreciate a weekend of vintage racing. It's a whole family entertainment. You know, it's history, it's heritage, and there's something for everybody.
There is John Fitch moving to the inside of the D-type Jag driven by Bob Akin, who told us before the race started he was very unhappy with his handling, so he didn't figure to run at any time up near the front. Sterling Moss goes by. There you see another one of the Coopers. And that is the one, of course, with McGinnis behind the wheel. He is looking for the checkered flag. The hand goes up, and he crosses the line first in this exhibition with Johnny K right behind him, but one lap down. John Fitch comes home second. Bob Akin is there in third, but this weekend comes to a close. It has been brought to you by BMW, the ultimate driving machine. To arrange a thorough test drive, simply phone your nearest BMW dealer. And by Quaker State Motor Oil. The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will. For Vic Elford, this is Larry Nuber. It's never goodbye, it's only so long in vintage cars.